My name is Adam Houle. I teach English here, and I'm going to help moderate a conversation between Joangela Edwins and Al Black on my far left. This is all poetry all the time, so I'm excited. I'm excited for that conversation. I'd like to just quickly read their bios, and I'd like to also just say on a personal note, when I moved to South Carolina in 2013, I had never been to the state, and Al and Joangela's work were some of the first that I encountered of South Carolina work, and I am very happy wherever I am, and I like to know the work of that area. So that was an honor. I feel fortunate for that. So, Joangela Edwins has published poems in over 100 journals and anthologies, including The Hollands Critic, Calyx, Descant, and New South. She is the author of the collection A Dangerous Heaven from Gnashing Teeth Publishing, and that's from last year, and the chapbooks Bitten, forthcoming from Dancing Girl Press, a beautiful press, and Play from Finishing Line. She has received awards from Winning Writers, Poetry Superhighway, the Jasper Project, and the SC Academy of Authors, and is a Pushcart Prize, Forward Prize, Best of the Net, and Bettering American Poetry nominee. A native South Carolinian, she lives in Florence, where she teaches at Francis Marion University and serves as the first poet laureate of the PD region of South Carolina. Al Black writes poetry, hosts workshops, and since 2010 has hosted over 1,000 poetry music events in the Midlands of South Carolina. He is the author of 2 books of poetry, I Only Left for Tea, from 2014, Muddy Ford Press, and Man with Two Shadows, 2018, Muddy Ford Press. Co-editor of Hand in Hand, Poets Respond to Race, and he edited Tall Women, was the 2017 Jasper Literary Artist of the Year, co-founded the Poets Respond to Race initiative, co-hosts the Chewing the Gristle, a poetry chat YouTube series, and has a weekly byline in the jasperproject.org, Poetry of the People. And I think, before I launch into my first question, the idea of literary community and citizenship, which to me is a valuable and important element of being a writer. That's just me, other people have different ideas. But I think that both Joangela and Al exemplify that commitment to their own work and the work of others. And so with that, I'd like to start. My first question involves, before I ask you to read a couple poems, involves a non-poetry book that all poets should read.
John Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath.
Okay.
It's very pertinent to today as well.
Anything by Toni Morrison.
Okay.
I mean, my favorite is Sula, but that's my personal favorite. But I mean, Beloved is what most people read, and it's beautiful. So if you haven't read Beloved, gosh darn it, read Beloved.
Okay. And I'm going to come back to those responses later on in our chat. So I'd like to ask, Joangela, would you mind sharing a couple of poems with us?
Not at all. I'm going to read a couple that are PD-centric, if I can get because like Adam, I couldn't get the printer to work. We love FMU, the technology sometimes. And so this is very unnatural to my early Gen X self, so just bear with me. But I wrote this one about 1.5 years ago. A friend of mine who's a former student that many people in here know, Natalie Mahaffey, who is a dean at Central Carolina, posted what was sort of a funny headline. Well, it wasn't a headline. A lot of you know Tanya Brown, who is a local reporter, and she has a Facebook page, and she'll put quick, flash, this is happening right now kind of things on the Facebook page. And she posted this, and it seemed like such a typical rural South Carolina event to be announcing in boldface on And so Natalie put it on her page, and John Tuttle, who many of you know, challenged me to write a poem based on this headline. So I did. And the headline is the title, "A Car Has Collided with a Cow on West Cummings Road in Timmonsville." Facebook post by a television reporter in Florence, South Carolina, February 1st, 2023. I hope you feel sorry for the cow before you feel any urge to laugh. I hope you then feel a little guilty for thinking of the people in the car second. But the only flesh and blood mentioned in the sentence is that of the cow. Noble in her humility, in her mundanity, and now I'm distracted from grief for the cow's pain, wondering if mundanity is a word. How often in my life I've written a word and wondered if it was real. How often in my life I've mourned the death of those whose kind have died 1,000 times and I never thought twice about them. Today for lunch, I ate a hamburger. Today, after waiting for 7 minutes for a passing train, I judged the distance between a pulsing ambulance and my fresh green light and gunned the engine. The ambulance was not that close, but I should have waited anyway. I should have given the driver space to trust a clear path between human need and the distant promise of help. I should have honored the fact that even those collisions that shatter only the peace of the mind's eye should probably never happen, since any violence, real or imagined, accidental or deliberate, takes our precious breath away. I feel as if there should be more to say, but I'm not sure what. Life thrives on this confusion, things barreling down upon us like an ambulance, closer than we think, like a cow, faster than we think. We must keep our eyes open for safety's sake, sure, but also we have so little time and so much of this mad earth yet to see. This is a poem. Somebody asked about form last night, and I don't write a lot of form poetry. I don't read a lot of form poetry anymore because I just don't. I don't know why. But this is a poem that it's not exactly a form, but it is rhyme. I wrote it during the pandemic. I would drive to Mount Hope Cemetery, which a lot of you know where that is on National Cemetery Road, appropriately. And it's a gorgeous cemetery. I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but I find peace in cemeteries. And I would go there and take walks. That was back when I didn't have a cane. And it occurred to me how many of the names on the headstones were names I recognized from teaching. And some of them were names I had never heard till I moved to the PD, like Poston, Cabbage Stalk, you know. And so, anyway, that got me thinking, and I wrote this poem. It's called Driving Through a Cemetery in a Town You Just Moved to. In this stone sea of unfamiliar names that will become familiar, given time, there rolls a rustling quietness which tames your rambling nerves. The markers, stained with grime, stand rigid as sentinels, and here and there a mausoleum dwarfs their gravitas as if to shout to the silencing air, "Here lies a man with money enough to house the dust of his bones better than living flesh." That's nothing new. Beneath the occasional tent, wet earth rests in piles. Such wounds are fresh. They will leave scars, fading, if permanent. And the more you turn down this or that small lane in search of no particular crypt or plot, the faster the sacred descends to the mundane, and the sooner you recognize there is a spot in the green expanse beyond the spaces filled that will, should you stay put, come soon to bear your own name, foreign to this peaceful field that could just as well be home as anywhere. And the last one I'm going to read is kind of a funny poem. It got an honorable mention in Winning Writer's annual Wurgle Flomp Humor Poetry Contest. I think people don't think about poetry as a space for the humorous as often as they should. But a friend of mine who used to teach here at one point was dating on like eharmonymatch.com. She went on a date with a dude who owned a yacht. She didn't stay with him. I don't know why. And one day they were going to go out sailing, but the weather turned, so they stayed on the yacht and watched old movies on like local TV, which was all they could get. And I can't remember what movie it was, but it had been so heavily edited for certain words that some of the things they said were unintentionally comic. And I started thinking about that. Who does that job? Who changes the words in, say, a Quentin Tarantino film? They do a whole lot of work if they're doing Quentin Tarantino, right? So that it can run on national television. So this is called "This Film Has Been Edited for Content." On basic cable, the killer skulks in his shadowy clothes and oversized hat into the desolate building. Up the dark steps as non-diegetic cellos play, and just before he blows out his victim's brains, spaghetti sauce slung across a pale wall, he whispers, "I've had it with your plucking spit." The boy man with his Disney good looks, thick hair, and China doll eyes has been caught by the girl we all know he should love in a compromising position, leaning in despite his mostly flawless judgment to kiss the duplicitous vixen in thick makeup and short leather skirt. And when at last he catches the truly good girl in an airport, of course, her blonde hair glowing in food court fluorescence, he confesses, "I was such a rotten ham casserole." Of course she takes him back. The spy who travels the world, London, Moscow, Marrakesh, always in a tailored suit, finds himself dropped inexplicably in an Indiana cornfield, weaving through rows to elude dark-faced gunmen who will catch him in the end, deposit him in a silo, spill dusty kernels over his Armani until, impossibly, he pulls a grappling hook from a silk pocket, swings his way to safety, lassos those lackeys of some off-screen evil genius, and just before he buries them in amber waves of grain, he declares, "God bless America, and shuck you." Think a moment about the poor saps whose job it is to swap this word for that, to blindfold us with cellophane, only to spare the audience offense and networks a slew of federal fines. Do they bring their work home with them? When they nick a finger or stub a toe, do they yell puck or snit? Do their grandmothers call them good girls, sweet boys? Do their mothers call them clever? We should give them even more credit. We should name them frustrated poets, these souls who worry as we do about next month's rent and their children's grades and their lovers' moods and the national debt and climate change and the mark they will leave on the world, a mark they make now with words that sound like other words, but aren't those words, aren't even most times their distant cousins. But still they fit the shape of a mouth, the lilt of a line, the tone of a moment, closely enough, if you hammer them in, square pegs in round holes, if you hammer and hammer, until your arm tires, until you misfire, and strike your own thumb, declaring yourself a rotten ham casserole. Which was a substitution in that film my friend was watching, a rotten ham casserole. Thank you.
Thanks, D'Angelo.
Al, would you like to read a couple now, please?
I have to follow that. I feel like Roddenham. So, for those that don't know, I was a last-minute fill-in for someone that was unable to make it. So, on this panel, I found out this morning that I should share a couple poems, or 2 or 3 or whatever. So, since she ended with a humorous poem, I'll start with one. There are folks out there and say, "Oh, I have writer's block." That's crap. You know, you don't work in a factory and say, "Oh, I have worker's block today." You put your hands to the job, and eventually you get into it. Pick up your pen and your paper and just start writing what you see, or remember something, or a book. You know, for me, my life was in books when I was growing up. Poets saved me, especially Emily Dickinson. Oh, she probably kept me from killing someone, but or maybe myself. So I was churched. Many of you were probably churched. That means you went to church whether you wanted to or not. And this is called Lessons I Learned in Church. Sunday morning, sitting on the porch, listening to an off-key choir of geese, my grass is high, irregular, and lush. God created flowering weeds to stand beautiful in my yard. If my father would come by for a visit and see my lawn, he would huff and puff about the Sabbath day being special, demand to know what the hell I did on Saturday, and then turn to my mother and say, "Come on, Alice, let's go." My father has strong opinions about the day of the week. High on his list was that God created Saturday so that his true believers may prepare for Sunday. Growing up, coming hell or high water, on Saturday, my father's children were true believers. Mow the lawn so the grass lays at just the right angle. Get a haircut downtown from Mr. Casto. Shine the shoes that you only wear on Sundays, even though they were shined just last week. Press your Sunday dress pants and lay your Bible out for morning. After you had wasted the better part of Saturday, he expected you to stay home on Sunday, something about the day of rest. I believe if he had left us alone on Saturday, we wouldn't need to rest on Sunday. I never took anything my father said as whole cloth. Looking for tiny holes in the fabric, I had my quiet rebellion, asking the barber to leave it just a fraction longer, missing a small spot with polish on the heel of my shoe, forgetting to trim the grass along the fence behind the garage, wearing my Sunday dress pants without underwear. Until one Sunday in 9th grade, I had snuck away to make out with an 8th grade girl in the church library. Coming back, I stopped in the bathroom. Hallelujah! I'm jumping up and down and speaking in tongues. I've zipped my ball sack in the zipper. Hallelujah! I'm jumping up and down and speaking in tongues. It hurt just as much zipping it back out. Bleeding like a stuck hog. No amount of toilet tissue could stop the flow. That Sunday I learned why sanitary napkins are so thick and bulky. Why some folks must touch a hot stove to believe that it is hot. And why I will never again wear zippered pants without underwear. True story. And some of you guys out there know what I'm talking about, if you'd be honest.
I was about to say the guys out there are squirming, I can see.
Okay, when this book came out in 2014, I was invited to read in Charleston by a staid group of people. And I was told, bring plenty of books because this will be a buying audience. And so I showed up at this reading in historic downtown Charleston, 2 blocks from the Slave Auction Museum. And the whole audience was white people. It pissed me off. So I started with this poem. This poem only has 2 verbs in it because some words, when you hear the words, create their own verbs. Blood. Blood upon the jungle floor, blood upon the kings of Ghana, blood upon the decks of ships, blood upon the sea, blood upon the auction block, blood upon the shackles, blood upon the cotton bales, stacked high in Charleston Bay. Blood upon the ramparts, blood upon the bayonets, blood upon Antietam fields, blood upon the swords of wrath, blood upon 600,000 graves, blood upon the rebel flag, blood upon a band that plays Sweet Dixieland, blood upon old money, blood upon a crow named Jim, blood upon white sheets, blood upon a hangman's noose, blood upon a billy club, blood upon a hotel balcony, blood upon this nation, blood upon you and me. I didn't sell a book. And I got no applause the whole reading. People were just looking at me like, who invited this guy? And I will read one from this book. This book is Man with Two Shadows. When my father passed, I wrote for 120 days and then published this book. So I'm going to have to, I think I know which one I want to read. You know, after you write a book, you're so involved with it, and after you've done readings when it first comes out, you hardly ever read those things again. And when you do pick it up, all of a sudden you say, wow, I wrote that. So after I was up there, I spent the last 2 nights my father was alive, sitting with him, because he was in a coma. And I would send I'm from 6 kids. I'd send my siblings home, and I'd say, you guys go sleep, I'll stay the night. And he passed the second night. But after the funeral, instead of driving the interstate, I'm a Hoosier in the land of cotton, by the way. I'm from northern Indiana, Purdue University, boiler up. But I didn't want to ride the interstates back, through 6 states. So I decided to take the country route, and I went through the country of Ohio, cutting over to West Virginia. And as I said, you should never have writer's block. We stopped for gas. And I walked in this place and I went, oh. And I got out a notebook and started writing what I saw. And after we got home, I wrote this poem. It's called Rod Serling, Short Order Cook at Heaven's Truck Stop. 30 minutes outside of Chillicothe, your wife pulls into the A&A truck stop. She is tired and it is your turn to drive. You unwind yourself from the passenger seat, walk up to a pole barn building and look through the restaurant window at the after-church Sunday go-to-meeting crowd seated inside. A placard at the door reads, Sunday Special, Johnny Nazareth with garlic bread. Lunch that sounds like a NASCAR driver is not appetizing. So instead you walk into the convenience store, go into the restroom, lock the door behind you, and pee into a urinal filled with chewing tobacco. On the back of the restroom door is a dispenser with a silhouette of a naked woman offering 2 genuine sanitary latex protection devices for only 50 cents. Wishing you could shower, you wash your hands, unlock the door, and leave. On the back side of a pizza rotisserie with a blinking heat lamp is a cooler proclaiming, "Live bait, our worms catch fish or die trying." And across from that is a dirty coffee counter with flavored creamers. You immediately decide that you will only purchase factory packaged food items. Grab a caffeinated drink, a bag of beef jerky, and walk to the counter. At the counter, you greet a woman cashier wearing a faded "Make America Great Again" t-shirt. Check out the Snake Eye Tactical Knives display. Wonder what makes a knife tactical? Pay for your snacks. And as you leave, you notice a display for certified bras. You ask yourself, what are the long-term effects of wearing an uncertified bra? You go outside, walk to your car, climb in, fasten your seatbelt, and drive away. The first road sign announces the Bob Evans Festival and Bean Dinner, to be held at the historic Bob Evans Farm in Rio Grande, Ohio. You tell yourself, that must be where hog heaven is. Chuckle and wonder, since your dad has passed on into the twilight zone, is he laughing with you too?
Thank you both so much. It is not a saying, but it should be. Every room is better when a poem is sort of up there. So hopefully that'll catch on. I'd like, I had some questions about place and what it means to be of a place, but the thread of warmth and humor in some of the poems here made me think of Kurt Vonnegut's, he was talking about humor writing, and he said that your laughter's as noble as your tears. And I don't know that I always agree with that, but I was wondering if you would comment on that, or how you see the role of humor in poetry, and what are maybe some of the risks of attempting humor in poetry?
Well, the risk is always, one of the risks is always that people won't laugh. That what you think is funny is not. I have lots of experience with that in my classes and among my colleagues, but
We'll get there.
yeah. And of course, there's also the risk that you are making light of something that's serious to other people in a way that they will perceive as disrespectful, whether you intended disrespect or not. And that is a tough balance. It's a hard line to walk, depending on what you're writing about, right? Because I said yesterday, one of my favorite tools in my angry women poems is sarcasm. And sarcasm depends so much on the reader to perceive what's going on. And if they don't perceive it, sometimes they take it seriously, and either they get offended by it, or hopefully, folks in 17th century England weren't going out and cooking Irish children, but that they actually think you're advocating for something that you are absolutely not advocating for, right? So it's a fine line, and I don't know the answer. I wish I did. I do that's an interesting quote, your laughter is as noble as your tears. Like you, I don't always agree with that. But I do think that sometimes we disrespect the importance of the human experience of laughter, because it helps us get by, and it also isn't as natural as grief. So if we pretend that laughter is not as important, that comedy is lesser than tragedy, then we're excising part of what it means to be human, and that's always dangerous, I think.
By the way, Kurt Vonnegut is also from Indiana. And maybe it's been assigned to you, but if you haven't read Slaughterhouse-Five, you should. Wow, humor. I think you begin to heal from pain, from tragedy, when you can begin to laugh at it. After the election, I wrote a short poem that started with Buster Keaton made slapstick an art form. Do you know what slapstick is? It's where people walk into walls, buildings fall on them and everything, and everybody sits and laughs hilariously in the silent movies of 100 years ago. And it's true. Later on in the poem, I said, maybe I'll go out and hurt myself. But humor is very important because you can really say things that may be unacceptable to the audience or difficult to accept if you said it just straight what you're trying to get at. I do want to say this. She was talking about some people don't get your humor. Hyperbole, which has a lot to do with sarcasm, is lost on conservatives. Just saying that. They don't get it. They take everything literal. So don't try to be funny about the pain we're experiencing with a conservative, because it's just lost. It's lost on them. Wow. That's all I'm going to say right now.
Yeah, it's a really, that's really useful and interesting to think about. I couldn't help but think of like laughing in self-defense sometimes as well.
Right.
Right. So thinking about good habits of writers, are there any habits that you have found particularly effective writing in all weather, right? And what I mean by that is it's, when you get bit and it's easy to write, it's easy to write, but it's not always easy to write, right? You all know this. And so what are some of the good habits you would pass along, or what are some of the bad habits that you wish we would all stop doing?
Good habit is reading. I think I mentioned this yesterday, but when I get stumped as to what do I want to write about today, all I have to do is grab a collection of poetry or an anthology of poetry with, poems by a bunch of different writers and start reading. And before I know it, I'm awful at finishing collections, because as soon as I start reading a collection of poetry, 5 or 6 poems in, I'm like, oh my God, I got to write something. And then I put it aside. And then I pick it up again a few days later, read 2 or 3 more. Oh my God, I got to write something. And it takes me a year to finish the book. But that's a really useful tool for me anyway. And it also helps us realize that we're in conversation in any art form that we are using. We're in conversation with other artists who are also using that art form, which is one of the reasons that when we were shaping our new creative writing major, one of the things I kind of insisted on is that, one of the literature classes that the students have to take has to be from like the last 120 years, because you want to see what people, at least close to your generation, have been saying, so that you have something to contribute to that conversation. One of the things I do, and I don't do it as often as I should, but I'll turn my phone off when I'm writing. That was a sentence I never would have dreamed I would say 25 years ago, when we weren't carrying phones in our pockets. But, and sometimes I don't do it. And sometimes I end up regretting it, because I end up doing little research when I'm writing a poem sometimes. I was telling you last week that I wrote this poem about the last elephant to ever live being killed by a hunter. And when I was writing it, I had it eating bamboo. And the editor of the magazine that decided to publish it emailed me and said, "We love this poem, we want to publish it, but do elephants really eat bamboo?" And I was like, yeah, I think they do, because I looked it up when I wrote the poem because I wasn't sure. I like the sound of bamboo in that line, but I didn't want to say something that was incorrect. And so, yeah, poets do research too. I don't think we have to spend the time like Jamila would spend, or Dr. Landon Houle would spend researching to write a novel, particularly a novel set at a different time or in a different place. But we do have to make sure that what we're writing isn't unintentionally far-fetched and off the wall. So there are times I wish I hadn't turned my phone off, because I'm like, I need to look this up. And so I go through the whole, I'm turning my damn phone back on. But that does help me stay away from the distractions, because this is a massive distraction. It really is. And we're kind of living in a world where we can't be without them, but at the same time, we can choose when to engage with it. And I need to be better about that in general, but when I'm writing is one of those times I try to choose to not be engaged with it.
Well, I agree with her on the first part, which is you have to be reading other people. Otherwise, you are writing in an echo chamber. It's a fact. So read and read and read some more. And I'm going to tell you what's also important to read is the introduction to the book. Because oftentimes in the introduction in the book, to the book, the person doing the introduction will refer to other authors that you might not know, that you need to know, and that you'll enjoy reading. The other thing that is a good habit is write something every day. Just tell you, I don't care if it's 11:30 at night, you go, oh shit, I haven't written anything. Sit down and write something. I carry a notebook everywhere I go. I got one in there. Because you never know when something's going to race through your mind and you say, oh, and if you wait till 2 hours later to write it down, that train is gone. You know, and you're going to end up at a different station. You're not going to find it. So I always carry a notebook. Now, I wasn't an academic. I was a long-time athlete and coach, as well as I did business. And I would sit in administrative meetings where somebody thought, oh, I have a captive audience, I can give a lecture, and they're going to give you a PowerPoint with it, and they're going to send it to you in email, and the whole crap. Well, I'd always go in there with a notebook, and people would say, damn, Al, you take great notes. No, I was writing poetry. You know, I'd just sit there in the back with my notebook. But write every day. Read other people. I know for me, a lot of the best prompts I either overhear in a coffee shop. There's a fact. I was sitting in a coffee shop one time, and two ladies were very involved across the room. And you're not eavesdropping, you're reading and writing yourself, and it's just white noise. And you know how sometimes there's all kinds of noise, and all of a sudden you say something, or somebody else says something, and the whole room just went quiet, and everyone hears it. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I hear this one woman say to the other woman, I never knew I was afraid of heights until I had to walk across that bridge. And I went, oh, fuck, man, I got that. I have used that as a prompt for 6 different poems, but that line never made it in the poem. If you're going to write, I don't care, prose or poetry, you have to be willing to kill your darling if it doesn't fit. Sometimes where you started a poem or a story or whatever, it's great. It's what's inspired you. But when you start looking at it, you're really trying to keep that in there. You got to kill your darlings. It's like if you raise chickens for eggs, there's going to be a time when you're going to have eat a chicken because it's no longer laying eggs. And if you won't eat that chicken, pretty soon you're going to have 12 or 13 chickens and none of them are laying eggs, but they're eating food and they're taking up space. I'm done.
That's good. That's a good metaphor. I want to add one thing to that. You can maybe move your chicken into isolation and. No.
She doesn't kill her chicken.
No. That's a famous Faulkner quote about. I think it's Faulkner killing all your darlings, but it does. You don't have to necessarily kill them. They just can't be in the house where you want to put them. They might be another poem, right? So you have to shuffle them elsewhere. Or they might be another short story, so you have to shuffle them elsewhere. But don't feel like, ooh, I love that line so much that you're hammering those square pegs into those round holes and hitting your thumb and saying rotten ham casserole. You don't want to do that. So, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I think I'm hearing is a sort of a flexibility and a trust in the work itself, and maybe not becoming overly reliant on what you think the poem ought to be. As a vegetarian, I'm going to say let the chickens go down, they're fine. Feed the chickens, Al, it's fine. I mean, geez.
You're in the South. What about Chick-fil-A?
What about it? Are there any questions from the audience? We're talking poems here, and I'd like to open it up. Yeah.
So I have a question for Ms. Joangela Edwins. So I, of course, I'm going to school here, and some of the particulars like read some poems for class. And I loved reading your poem Requiem and your poem Don't Beat His Wife. And for context, Requiem, if I remember correctly, talks about mourning things that you wish would be gone. And I love that opening prompt of, wow, that was like missing something that you clearly wanted to go away. And the Don't Beat His Wife is a play on the Southern saying of when the sun shines while it's raining, the Don't Beat His Wife. And going off on a, angry woman rant about how, of course, Noah gets away with it because he's a man and men get away with everything. And I wanted to question the origin of what made you write both of those poems. What was the prompt? What was in your head? What was the scenario for why am I missing something I wanted to go away? And what was the scenario that made you take that quote, that saying, and write that angry?
Thank you for those questions. That's you did a great job too of distilling what those two poems are about. Good job. Requiem was inspired by it was about this time of year because we had Adrian Matika here, who's a wonderful poet and was a great guy, hilarious guy. And he wanted postcards. And you couldn't find, from Florence, and you couldn't find Florence postcards anywhere. So I was driving all around Florence looking for postcards one afternoon. Only we later found out in his hotel there were some postcards. But I went to this little country store off of, 327 Williston Road? Yeah. So I went to this little country store, and there's an image in that poem of what's called a murmuration, which is one of my favorite words, where starlings will get into this movement. You've probably seen it, where the birds who are migrating are flying, and they go into this like synchronized dance. And that happened across the way when I was coming out saying, damn it, they don't have postcards. And I just thought, that's gorgeous. What's going to happen to them down the road? How many of those birds are going to die within 24 hours? I don't know. I have a morbid imagination. And then the next day, I was sweeping the cobwebs off of my porch, and some of them had like little leftover gnat exoskeletons or something in them that the spiders had eaten. And I thought, and for whatever reason, I just sort of started tearing up. I'm like, why am I tearing up over dead gnats? I hate them. They get in my face, they're unpleasant. And it just occurred to me that, of course, there's this gorgeous poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins called Spring and Fall, where, the speaker is speaking to a little girl who's crying because the leaves are falling from the trees. And at the end, he says, it's the grief man was born for. It is Margaret you mourn for. The little girl's name is Margaret. It's like you're mourning for yourself. And so there's a little bit of that, and also just thinking about all the people in my life who had fallen away and who, if you think about it, how many of us know much about our great-grandparents, right? They weren't that far removed from us in time, but mostly we know stories. I only ever met one of mine, and she died when I was a little kid, right? So all of that went into that poem. Devil's beating his wife was after the election in 2016. And I just started thinking about how certain political figures seem to empower men who are not good actors. And there are plenty of men who are very good actors. I'm sitting between two right now. But there are men out there who are not good actors, and for whatever reason, life has put women in positions of vulnerability often around those men. And it also occurred to me that, my mother would say when the sun was shining and it would rain, she said, well, when we were growing up, she grew up in East Tennessee and Eastern Kentucky, we'd say that means it's going to rain the same time tomorrow. And when my dad saw that, he said, oh no, that's the devil's beating his wife. And it occurred to me how strange that my dad, and I heard this from other places, most commonly I heard the devil's beating his wife. But how strange that my dad has this domestic violence image associated with that phenomenon. And my mom just has this sort of beautiful meteorological image. And I just started thinking about misogyny and power and the Bible. I mentioned yesterday that I was sent to a Baptist school. Neither of my parents were extremely religious, and my mother was even a converted Catholic who didn't practice, but they sent me to a Baptist school. And you are going to be scarred if you go to a Baptist school in the 1980s. You just are. Everywhere you look, any record you listen to on the radio, the devil is talking to you, right? So the devil was everywhere. And the thought that, beware of the devil, beware of the devil, but the devil's beating his wife. It was kind of a strange juxtaposition. So that was a very long answer to your very intelligent questions.
We are at the end of our time. Can we give our poets another round of applause, please? Thank you both very much. That was absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.